This episode, The Shocking Truth, Inspecting Your Electrical System on a Regular Basis. In this episode, the Handyman Pros discuss regular inspections of your electrical system. Welcome to the Handyman Pros radio show, home improvement and maintenance tips from the pros. Thanks for listening to another edition of the Handyman Pros radio show, where our goal is to help you save time, money, and aggravation on your home maintenance and repair. This edition's entitled, The Shocking Truth. To help me explain, I'm with my ever-cheerful co-host, Noel Buddy John. John, what has been going on in your life this week?
Hey, greetings, Larry. Well, it's very timely that we're going to talk about some electrical inspection here. At some point we're going to have some electrical folks on, some electricians on to talk about other specifics. But I think let's cover some basics here for most of the people. I will tell you what was going on this week. I had a flickering light, and I've had these for a while in my basement bathroom. And I finally chased it down, and it was just, that usually is an indication that you just don't have a solid source that's not tied up properly. Not a good implementation of the wiring, and you've got something loose somewhere. So I go back and I'm looking, and I had forgotten that there was a junction box in a ceiling where I had covered it, and I do have a suspended ceiling, and I popped up one of the tiles, and lo and behold, there it was, and I hadn't seen this thing in years and years and years. But sure enough, there was a loose connection in there. That was not good.
So you found it by wetting your fingers and touching all the electrical connections? Is that how you did that?
With my tongue.
With your tongue?
Ooh. I had the circuit off, and I chased it back, and I looked, and there was a number of wires that were in the nut, in the wire nut, and they just were not making good contact. And I redid it, and sure enough, that solved the problem. But that brought me to the realization that I need to pay more attention to these things, because that's all I needed was that thing sitting up there with people walking around upstairs, and with the vibration and stuff, and this thing sitting there possibly arcing.
Right.
And nothing good comes from that.
No, nothing good comes from old bad electrical connections. What are you talking about? Oh,
yeah.
No.
So I don't know if you've ever experienced those kind of things, but I thought this week we'd kind of address some of the things that as homeowners that we can go around and start to look at our electrical systems, and just kind of give it some eyeballs here.
So, all right. So anytime that we talk about electric, I just want to throw out some safety issues. Folks, if you are not comfortable with electricity, please don't do it, right? Because it can be very, very dangerous. It's not as, I don't want to say it's not as dangerous as people think, but it can bite you. It can bite you, and it can hurt you very badly if you're not careful. So if you're not comfortable with it at all, hire an electrician, do that, or hire a handyman that's comfortable with some of it, or make sure you do turn the power off, and we'll get into talking about that. And we're also going to talk about some other safety factors about when working with electricity, ways you can verify and things like that, right, John? So I think that's kind of our lead into our safety, checks. Like one of the things that both you and I had talked about this before the show, but people, we as handymen, we tend to kind of overlook a lot of the things that we do on a regular basis that we really don't think about because we just do it every day, right? So when I walk around the house and I see lights flickering, I immediately jump on it. But I know that we've been called in on jobs many, many times, and the lights are flickering or a light doesn't come on, and they've done all they can to check it, or all that they think they know how to do, and to check it, and come to find out it's usually many times it's just something simple. But we just want people to feel comfortable with a general check, right? So let's get into it. What would we need to be safe? What do we need for tools, John?
Yeah, so I think just from a standard, just from some simple tools, is a ground fault circuit interrupter tester. It looks like a little cube, and it has a bunch of lights on it. They're fairly inexpensive, and That's specifically meant to test these ground fault circuit interrupter type of circuits that are around any wet areas, per code, and those things need to be installed and working properly to protect you. I would suggest for folks out there, you can buy a non-contact indicator. It's like a little stick, like a little wand. You don't even have to get near the electricity. And when you turn this thing on, if any electricity is around, it will light up and beep, right, Larry?
Yes,
I mean,
it will.
we've got those.
Yeah, and it'll actually do that if you rub your arm and get static electricity too. So.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty sensitive.
Pretty sensitive, yeah.
And also a light probe. Sometimes if folks, I'll echo Larry's sentiment here about, if you're not comfortable around electricity, by no means, you don't have to deal with it. But I've used a light probe, which is just a light it's got a couple little, probes on it that you can touch the different sides of terminals and things, and the light lights up. I'm not talking about multimeters. I'm not talking about anything. It's a simple way to say, hey, I got 110 going through here, or I don't. But I think, I saw those at the big box store the other day. All three of those are like $24. And I think everybody out there as a homeowner should have these kind of tools. They really do come in handy. And I can't tell you how many times that I have been in homes that, there might be a dead socket. There might be, all kinds of things that these tools will absolutely tell you right away. Whether you want to fix that socket or not yourself, that's a whole different thing. But, at least you can kind of start to understand what the issues are.
Right. Right.
Anything else, Barry?
No, I think that's really those all three. I mean, I have the non-contact on my belt all the time. And anytime I do anything with electricity, I use that because I want to make sure, is it hot or is it not, right? And right. I mean, because been bitten a couple of times. I mean, I'm not going to lie, been bitten
more than once.
Yep. More than once, and it's not a whole lot of fun, folks. I tell a quick story. One time I was actually I can't remember what I was doing, but I was behind a vending machine on one of my vending machines, and I touched the wrong thing, and brother, I got slammed between the wall and the vending machine like 4 or 5 times. And fortunately, the guy that was with me, he's like, "What the heck's going on?" I'm like, "Yeah, I just got electrocuted, like pretty bad." He's like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm going to be sore," because I was sore for like 2 days, man. It was a major electrical shock, and I never did find out where that was coming from, but somewhere I grounded, and man, wow,
yeah,
buddy,
that's a whole discussion there in and of itself.
Yep. So anyway, test, John. Where do you think we should start?
Well, to start to look at this, so we kind of talked about the tools. So let's put the tools aside just for one quick second. One of the things that I would where I would start on my inspection is, folks, I think we've talked about this before, is to know where the breaker box is in your house. Power outages these days are pretty rare for most of us. Some people, I know some folks, you're probably saying, well, they go out all the time. So I know that you know where the breaker box is. But it's a good thing to kind of familiarize yourself with where it is. Number one. Number two is, it's a good thing now to open it up, just to open a little door up and look at it, familiarize yourself with it. And I will tell you, one of my pet peeves is not being able to read what the electrician put on there and what circuits do what. So that's a whole nother discussion.
Or what circuits have been changed and not properly labeled.
Exactly, right? Exactly. But I think, you just look around it. It's very, it's clean. There's no clutter. Because if you really need to go in there and if a circuit breaker pops and you have to reset it, you could be in the dark. So you don't want to have a whole bunch of stuff around there. So you want to be able to get to it. To me, I take pictures of everything and I put them in an electronic file. I don't know how everybody else works, but it's a good thing to take a picture of the little piece of paper in there with all the different circuits on it. If it's readable, it's great to do that because sometimes over time those things start to fade away. Just for archival sake, is to, take a picture of that, be able to read it. And then sometimes I flip some of those breakers to make sure that they're free and clear, and I know I might have to run around and reset some clocks that are blinking, but, some of those breakers can can get stuck.
They can get stuck, and they can get stuck, and if they go off too much, they can get old. At which point you need to call an electrician. That's
another good point. That's a good point right there. That's a really good point right there. So, it's kind of that kind of thing is to start there. Look at the panel, and then what I would do
is find out which breaker your wife is watching TV on and flip that breaker off.
Yeah, flip that off. Flip off with the kids, right? Playing on the computer,
playing the video games. Ooh, click. Whoops. Sorry.
Keep going. The next thing I would do is just any wires that are visible around the house. You might be in the basement, you might be in the attic. Always take a look at those wires. Make sure that there's no discoloration. Now I know that most of the wires are going to be behind the walls, so you're going to say, John, I can't see them because they're behind the walls. Yeah, I know, but in the instances where there is exposed wiring, things like that, it's always good to look at that and just see what's going on with it. Kind of be your own inspector. If there's a discoloration, a very strange discoloration, if there's a smell, electrical smell, if they're rodent damage.
Yeah, particularly in attics, right? Because
exactly.
Rodents, for whatever reason, those little buggers love to eat the insulation off of wires.
Yeah.
And they never ground themselves out, which is too bad. But anyway, which would mean they would electrocute themselves. But they do tend to, if you spend any time in an attic, particularly older houses, which y'all know I've got some old house built in like the 40s. There's always rodents up there, and it always seems like I'm always finding every once in a while insulation chewed off the wires. And sometimes it's all the way through, sometimes it's not, because sometimes they just get the outer core. But it's just good to check, right, John? So you're right. One other thing I want to talk about just quickly on discoloration. Folks, if you have discoloration on an outlet, you need to not be using that outlet, right, John?
No, absolutely. And we've run into that. And I've had one here in my house. It's like, wait a minute, did that come from, well, we're going to talk about outlets here in a minute, but did that come from the inside of that outlet, or was it something that I pulled out of the outlet, and it just kind of arced on its way out, that was still running. I see that kind of stuff. I worked around electricity a lot, heavy duty stuff when I was an aircraft mechanic.
Yep.
And I was like, yeah, I'm pretty tuned into the inspection of things like that. But anyways, that's the kind of thing. And Larry, I go back to the rodents and things like that start to eat away at those wires. And when you see that, you need to try to fix that is pretty quick.
Yes.
You do not want. Okay, let me separate something. Down here in Atlanta, in this area, and maybe in a lot of other areas, you can use these Romex type cables. They don't have to be inside of metal clad. So rodents might be able to get to those. When growing up in Chicago, the code was all conduit. So that was it's a protective layer that they feed wires through.
Right.
And that's kind of a whole different ball game there. But when you're right, when you have wires here that are exposed, you want to try to get those fixed if you see anything like that, because there's nothing worse than knowing that there's or a partially exposed wire that might be in your attic,
Around all your flammable Christmas tree items.
Right. Yes. To me, I'd be, every night I go to bed, I'd be thinking about that thing up there. Like, is this the night? So anyways, so that's the kind of thing. I mean, Larry, what about the GFCI circuits, the ground fault circuits?
So I guess we need to talk a little bit about what a ground fault is and what it's made to do. So a ground fault is what, John? It reads that when you actually ground something grounds to it, right? And so tell us more about that.
Well, that's right. When it's meant to be very reactive to a situation where the electricity has jumped, so that it turns itself off very, very fast. If that situation happened in a regular outlet, before the circuit breaker could pop, you would have some real issues. In
you,
a ground,
you meaning a person.
Yes, you would have some
to
issues.
your safety. Yes,
That's correct. In a ground fault circuit, especially in any wet areas, if those things get wet just a little bit, they will click off. And and the reason that we're bringing this up is because they have a little reset switch on them, and one ground fault circuit, might have one of those type of outlets, which is then daisy chained with regular looking outlets around it. Many times, if that ground fault circuit trips, it's not in your breaker box, but it's right on.
It's at the outlet.
That outlet, which controls the other outlets. There's one side that's the line, and the other one's the load. And not going to get into all that, but that kind of thing happens. And I tell you that I've got one that was down in my basement, all on this one ground fault circuit, and a hairdryer in the bathroom tripped it upstairs. And I couldn't find this. I couldn't find how to turn the circuit back on until I looked around in the basement. And sure enough, there's one of those down there that controlled that circuit. Crazy as that was, but folks, you just need to know what that is. And I think we've talked about that before. But you want to go around and take a look at those things, and you want to press the little test button on it. They have two buttons. One's a test and one's a reset, to make sure that thing pops. So it simulates an issue that you might have if it got wet or a line got crossed. Okay. So that way it stops you from getting electrocuted with wet hands on a toaster, let's say.
But John, I dropped the hairdryer into my ex-wife's bathtub while she was in it, and I don't understand. The thing worked. It worked.
That's still being litigated, isn't it?
I think so. But anyway.
So so you can use one of those the GFCI tester that we talked about earlier in those circuits, and make sure that those things are wired up, and the little buttons on the little lights on it will tell you if it is or not. But these are very important circuits. As time has gone on, the code has compelled that these things be used a lot more. Yep. In every situation where it was only around maybe a kitchen at one time. Now they're everywhere. You'll see these things everywhere. So much so that, when we get the electrician thing to come in and talk about it, but they'll actually have regular GFCI circuit breakers in your breaker box.
In your breaker box, yeah.
I don't. Yep. And there's also ART fault. Yep. ART fault. There are all kinds of things now, but I don't have. But just be aware that these things are in line around. That you want to take a look at. Know that they work. Okay, just kind of wrap that up.
And then one other thing too, much like a circuit breaker, they do go bad on occasion.
That's exactly right. That's why it's a great point, Larry, and that's why you want to do right. You want to test those things.
Yeah, you want to test. You want to test for function, but you also want to make sure that it actually works too. And sometimes that's misleading. So you'll go in and you say, "Man, I've got a real problem," and you swap out the ground fault outlet, and everything goes back to fix, and what you end up with is just a bad ground fault. And so you just have to have there's just a fine line there is what it is. And it's just they're basically a mini circuit breaker, and when they pop if they pop a lot, they're going to go bad quick. So they're made to pop, but they're not made to pop excessively. So anyway,
right. So the next thing I'd do is I'd go from there. I'd just check here's one of the things that I do around my house a lot is to check the outside outlets.
Yep.
I don't, it's like some of those the great big extension cords that I use that everybody would use, outside and things like that. When you're pulling those things in and out of there, sometimes you can loosen those outlets up.
Yeah,
and
off the wall.
On mine.
Yeah, pull them out off the wall. Actually,
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
So now you got a gap. Water gets in there, and nothing good comes from that. So, make sure that they're tight, make sure that they're up to code. Mine, the code now is a different code than when I had mine. I used to have those metal. I don't know, Larry, on your house, do you have the big encasement around it, the big plastic encasement, or do you have the ones that are just the metal ones?
Mine are plastic because I've replaced them all. I'm not big on metal and electricity together.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
Well, so I've got the older ones, and some of those things got loose, and water will get in. I'll be pressure washing, and folks, you do this yourself, right? You'll be out there with the hose, a garden hose or whatever. The water gets in there, and pretty soon you can pop a breaker, and
Yep.
that kind of thing. So, just make sure that they're tight and they're covered properly. So, these are just good little tips to that are easy to do.
Easy to recognize and easy to fix. I mean, pretty much easy to fix. One.
Exactly.
I want to call you out on something, John. Can I ask you a question? Please tell me you don't unplug your outlets by yanking on the cord.
I try not to. But when you're out there and you're like doing something and you trip across the cord.
Oh, well, you didn't say that. You said you were pulling the cord.
It pulls it off.
Yeah.
No, I don't. No, I don't. Yeah, I stand back, Larry. Here's generally what I do. So I stand back about 20 feet and I just yank the hell out of it.
Folks, we make light of it because that is not the proper way to unplug your extension cords. Really, and really, this comes from us being, basically frugal and taking care of our tools. To properly really unplug your extension cords, please grab the plug itself and pull it out. Don't yank on the cord, because you will yank the cord right out of that plug. Is eventually what will happen. If you do it enough times, you'll go, I plug it in, and it doesn't work anymore. Well, that's why, because you pulled the wires right out of the plug. So it's not a good practice to pull. Everybody does it. I'm not saying I don't do it. I usually do it with my foot. I actually have the cord in my hand. I take my foot, I put it close to the plug, and pull it out that way with tension on it. But that's the way I do it, but that's not even right either.
That brings up a whole nother subject, of your extension cords, and we're going to get into that one of these days, how to store those things.
Yep.
But you're absolutely right. Don't mistreat those things.
The wire is not how to unplug anything. That's my point, right?
Right.
I don't care if it's a lamp. I don't care what it is. The wire is not the way that you pull it to get it off. Anyway.
Right. And make sure that they're properly grounded. Okay. Do not cut that third pin off of those things. And that's a whole other thing we'll talk about. Because,
we'll talk about that
on any construction site, they see you do that, you're immediately kicked off. And they cut cut that extension cord into about 1,000 different pieces, so you never use it again.
Well, that's what tape's for. Oh, never mind.
Yeah. So the other thing is then go on the inside and look at all your outlets. Just like you did with the GFCI outlets. You can test them with your testers. Make sure that there's no loose covers. I know, Larry, that drives both of us nuts when we see loose covers on electrical outlets.
A combination of loose covers and also the outlets are actually itself. The outlet is loose from the box. And
yes.
To give you the idea, folks, is the outlet or the cover of the outlet should not move side to side. You should not be able to twist it. It should be pretty firm in the wall. Okay, and how this really works is that the cover itself actually should pull into the wall a little bit, and just depending on how the mount was on the box, the outlet itself might be a tad loose, but it should be firm and tight when it's completely locked. And don't let it move side to side and back and forth, because that's a recipe for what, John? It's a recipe for disaster, isn't it?
This is so, folks. So what we're trying to say here on this whole thing is really, that anything that's loose is really dangerous, because once it starts to arc, it doesn't take much to set things in motion like a fire, and that's what we're trying to avoid here. Make sure everything's tight, everything's secured, and make sure that they're not blocked with any dirt or dust. Go around. I clean mine. Just from a vacuum. I just kind of throw the vacuum on there. Vacuum them out. Who knows what's getting in there, right?
You don't want to know. I could tell you, right? After in this 1943 house, I don't want to tell you what we vacuumed out of the outlets. You don't want to know.
Right.
You really don't want to know.
Yeah, exactly. I think finally is that I would just say, and Larry, I don't know about you, but I'm just looking at things like in my computer room that I've got a lot of stuff plugged into a big octopus thing.
It's a power bar, John. Come on.
It's a power bar, and it's kind of funny that you after a while, time marches on, and things are in there for a long time, and you just never know how these cables and cords and things are performing over time. So it's a good thing to check out everything, and don't overload a circuit, folks. Don't put a bunch of these things on one circuit.
Well, but there's open plugs, John. I don't understand. There's open plugs.
You daisy chain one to the other.
Yeah, that. Yeah, I was just gonna say I've got 3 of them tied together, and I don't understand why I can't run my power saw off the last one.
Right.
And I've got my computer and my TV, and I've got my everything else tied up into it. We won't get into that. But.
So you don't want to overload those circuits, So just it's a good thing just to take a look, do a visual inspection, make sure that you don't see any discolorations, you're not smelling any burning insulation type of electrical smells, things like that. I can't tell you how many times that I've seen some really dangerous things out there. We've all seen it. We've all seen it. So, that's the kind of thing I would be looking at right now. And I would say the last thing, if you are going to use these extension cords inside, or these these power strips, use high quality ones that can carry the load.
Yeah, it's really worth it in the end. You'll pay a lot for them, but it's just so worth it because it's safe. You also know it carries the load. I have actually had inexpensive power cords, if you want to call them that, catch on fire, and they catch on fire because they're just plain old overloaded. And folks, that's what happens, by the way. When you use too thin a wire, it gets hot. It gets really hot. John, that's one of the things we didn't talk about. When you're walking around to your various outlets and things, we talked about using your senses, but one of the other things is put your hands up close to the outlet. If you feel heat,
yeah, that's a really good point.
You've got something's not quite right. It shouldn't be warm, like I don't know how would you describe it, John? I want to say really warm, but that's not like burning warm, but it really shouldn't even be warm. I mean, other than room, it should be room temperature.
It shouldn't be a different temperature than the rest of the wall and the in the air around it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's just another one of those little tips that sometimes, I've come on that where I'm like, wow, that outlet's a little warm, and then you find out something's not quite, or you take it apart and something's not quite right with it, and then, or generally it just means, like in the case that I'm thinking about was one that it just had come on, it was coming in and out, in and out, in and out. It was constantly arcing, and it was just making it warm, and I was like, yeah, that's just, and it was a 2-minute fix. It was a 2-minute fix. We just retightened up the connection, all set, cooled right down, no problems. But it could have been disastrous after. It could
that's the point. When I go, if I go all the way back to the beginning of this segment, is that when I discovered this thing arcing in my ceiling or loose, that was really something. I was really taken aback by that. I can't tell you that scared me. Because it wouldn't be long before it would catch things on fire.
Well, the last spaceship I took apart, they had an immense electrical system. And I'm not going to tell you what they did with their electrical system, but John, did you find that when you took the spaceship apart?
It was shocking, Larry. Shocking.
Ba-dum-boom. Folks, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, send us an email at questions@handymanprosradioshow.com. You can go on our website. You can leave us a voice message. You can go to our Facebook group at Handyman Pros. Follow us on Twitter at Handyman Radio. Send us a smoke signal. We don't care. We just want to hear from you all. We hope you enjoy the show, and we will talk to you soon. Ladies and gentlemen, if you've enjoyed this podcast and have derived some value from it, here's 4 things you can do. 1, tell your friends about this podcast. 2, hit subscribe on your podcast player. While you're there, leave us a review. 3, subscribe to our newsletter by going to handymanprosradioshow.com and click on the subscribe button. We'll inform you of upcoming events, shows, and give you actionable tips for maintaining your home and property. And 4, send us an email with your questions to questions@handymanprosradioshow.com. That's handymanprosradioshow.com. That's our show for this week. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week on the Handyman Pros Radio Show.